Welcome to the broadcast, my dear sweet old fruits. I'm sorry to come to you looking so funereal. This is probably going to read as black over the screen, but it's actually a deep purple with some amethysty tones, but I don't think that will show up very well. And even so, that's a bit dark, isn't it, for this time of year? Although it is a slightly drab day today, but I'm not complaining. I love a little bit of gloom, don't I? Anyway, aside from bringing a little bit of gloom into your day, I just wanted to sit down and have a chit-chat with you, a bit of a chinwag, so put the kettle on. We'll have a little bit of a dose of royalty during the broadcast, and then I will address the riots that are going on here in the kingdom towards the end of the broadcast, and I will furnish the box below with a timestamp for that. So that's all I've got for you. Take it or leave it. I'm not going to beg you to stay. I'm not going to beg you to watch. But if you care to join me, then you are very welcome, my dear. Please do pull up a throne and let's relax. I made an almighty boob in the last broadcast, which is actually a little bit embarrassing. Rather embarrassing. I reported on the Edinburghs. I said that they had been in Birmingham for the Commonwealth Games. Well, actually, the Commonwealth Games occurred in 2022, and that was where the story was from. I was 2 years out. And it went completely over my airhead, my dear. Completely over my airhead. Honestly, somehow the article ended up in my feed when I was looking around to see what was going on. Well, and there I was thinking that Edward looked really rather good. And I thought, well, haven't I seen that dress on Sophie before? It rings a bell. Well, now I know why it was familiar. And I feel very silly. Whoops-a-daisy, do forgive me. Do forgive me, my dear, for that misinformation. How stupid. Now, on the subject of the coffee that I invented, called the Blanche Devereaux, that I named, Laurie N. said, "Thank you, River, for the Golden Girls reference. Perhaps a scone with your coffee will bring full circle the ladies of the lanai." I didn't know what a lanai was, my dear. I was ignorant. And it is an open veranda. Perhaps you're more au fait with that in the States. In exotic climes, a lanai. Ladies of the lanai, indeed, that's what we are, my dear. And just to clear up confusion about the Blanche Devereaux, when I said that the Americano must be store-bought, what I meant is that in order for it to qualify to be a Blanche Devereaux, it must be made by a barista in a coffee shop, whichever one you want, Starbucks or some fancy artisan outlet, whatever it is, my dear, but it must be brewed and made by a barista, served to you, then you take it home and you add the whisker of double cream. Okay, that is the Blanche Devereaux. It's still a very dark brew, almost black, but it just has that whisker of double cream that gives it the blanche. It's not macchiato, it's not cafe au lait, it's not anything else. It has another name. This is my invention, and it is the Blanche Devereaux. And Miss Lee NY says, when I looked up Devereaux, I saw that one meaning is the bank of a river, so now I get it. Isn't that curious? It seems that you're right, my dear. It alludes to the banks of a river. I didn't know that. That is not what I was alluding to with Devereaux, so I've learned another new thing. French, Norman, apparently. From Evreux, Devereaux. There we go. A fascination of words. Now, I did have a rather misty-eyed moment. Did you see this little clip of the King's guards, the horse guards? Oh, those poor horse guards. They sit motionless there, don't they, my dear? Probably getting pins and needles in their backside. They have to control the horse for all that time, and they have to put up with a stream of tourists, behaving like lunatics, many of them, all day long. And there was a display of real tender-heartedness from one of them, who guided his steed to a moment of affection and joy with this visitor. And it gave me a real lift. It was a real tonic. There is life's magic, isn't it, my dears? There is life's magic. Those lump-in-the-throat moments that give one an inner smile, or an inner sigh, or an aha moment of transcendence, where the spirit dances with the divine. Gorgeous. The Edinburgh Tattoo were absolutely delighted to welcome their patron, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, to fulfil the prestigious role as salute taker for this year's show, Journeys. And Sophie has been extremely busy as our Duchess of Edinburgh. She has been a busy bee this week, as she always is, and she met the Olympic Games Operations Centre staff at the UK Embassy in France. And as patron of GB hockey, she watched the team defeated by India and the Netherlands. She wore a purple floral print dress by Erdem at the track cycling meet, and the espadrilles, Penelope Chilvers. And she was seen looking absolutely gleeful. The girl was in raptures because we'd actually won something for a change. Isn't that something? We'd won a gold medal and a world record in the women's team, which of course can mean absolutely anything nowadays. She later attended afternoon tea for the British triathlon, and at Galerie d'Or she learnt about the history of the couture house. She wore Victoria Beckham with gold earrings, and after returning from Paris, she attended a charity performance of Starlight Express and wore a silk gold gelato dress by Metelier. And this was at the Wembley Park Theatre in support of the Orpheus Centre, which is a disability charity and college in Surrey for young disabled adults to learn and develop through the arts. And Prince Edward is their patron. He wore a broad smile, and wouldn't you if your wife was a sun-kissed golden trophy known as Sophie? Now, on the subject of me not especially being a natural smiler, always smiling and gurning to camera, it just doesn't come naturally to me. A message from Helena Kuch, or Helena Kuchiku, Elena, who knows? I'm going to go with Helena Kuch. Do you know who smiles all the time? Meghan Markle. That's ridiculous. It's not natural to smile all the time, and it would be out of context with some of your thoughts. Well, yes, Meghan does smile too much. We all know that, my dear. Or she paints expressions of doe-eyed concern all over her face to garner sympathy, doesn't she? The beseeching peepers of a pound puppy. I especially saw that on the interview with Tom Bradby, but it was also seen on Oprah. It's also seen anywhere she rocks up. But she is not actually skillful at papering over the cracks between expressions, as we saw the other day on the morning show, the Sunday morning show. Last week when she appeared, the mask slips and irritation is glimpsed. Now, of course, most of us, and I'd say probably all of us, mask to some degree or another in our social interactions, if you want to call it masking. For example, laughter is a very interesting device. It fascinates me to listen in on. If you're on the bus and you hear a conversation going on behind you, take a moment to eavesdrop and notice, especially if you get a laugher, a loud laugher, or two people in dialogue laughing. You will rarely hear laughter as a reaction to something that is genuinely amusing, that, sort of makes your belly bounce. That is rare. It is a communication tool. And I mention that to say because once you notice it, you'll notice that most of us unwittingly put on some sort of facade or employ these devices and techniques to communicate with people. There's a natural element to it, my dears. But with the Duchess of Sussex, well, we go back to looking like the innocent flower, but being the serpent under it. That applies to her. She must disguise her thunderous and tempestuous and threatening hysteria with her smile, if we are to believe the testimony from the Sussex survivors, as told to Valentine Lowe. Remember that? He said that they were shaking in fear. Shaking in fear, as directly told to him. So she's got to disguise that ability to threaten and frighten. Trust in me, trust in me. The slippery snake. Yes. With others, of course, you can scarce sense it. It's there, but you can scarce sense it. And a great example of that is the late Queen Elizabeth, because there was barely a second of polite laughter. Shall we say that? It even made for some rather awkward moments, because she sort of refused to perform. In that respect, of course, she was performing in a different sort of way by the elegance of refusal, but wasn't performing in what is expected of people when they are cajoled into smiles and laughter. If she smiled, it's because she meant it. If she laughed, it's because she was amused. And it's actually quite difficult to refrain and restrain yourself from being goaded into it conversationally. King Charles, on the other hand, does it a lot. He employs laughter as a device, and jollity, and being jovial. He employs it as a lubrication for the engine of social interaction. You see it plainly with him every single day, especially with his little device of pointing and laughing at people to foster some goodwill, banter between them, and make it sound as if he's been enchanted by their funny quip. Sometimes it's genuine, sometimes he's being polite and ushering things along. It's quite interesting to look at the way that we perform, isn't it, and the psychology behind it, and how we're all very different. Now, a quick update with regards to Samantha Markle, who's made a last-ditch attempt to sue Rachel Megg by appealing against the court ruling which dismissed her defamation case in March, and she contends that the judge overlooked implied defamation by omitting key facts. Well, I never thought Samantha had a case to begin with. I told you that, and it appeared that I was right, but let's see what the courts will find. One never knows until the cookie crumbles. There's no date set at this moment in time, but the appeal seeks an oral hearing, and Samantha argues that Meghan's remarks during the Oprah spectacle were demonstrably false and malicious lies. Well, case or no case, I would certainly wager that the Duchess is capable of those things. Now we will move on to the subject of the riots of the kingdom for this next segment of the broadcast. If that's too heavy for you, be gone, be gone. See you next time. Patty Gill said, will the royals address the rioting? And Teapot said, River, I know His Royal Highness is on holiday, but his country is in uproar, and I must say that he is needed to assist with inspiring calm with his dulcet tones. Is it too much to ask? When you say His Royal Highness, I'm presuming you are meaning His Majesty, the King, my dear. There have been calls for the King to address and pacify the nation, if you will. I've seen a few characters popping up asking, where is the King? This would be a really opportune moment for him to come forward and speak. The news cycle of the ceaseless violence that's been in my face, personally, has been quite overwhelming. I'm sure it has for many of you. I've ended up switching off and wanting to get away from it over the last few days, I'm afraid. We are all being saturated with biased feeds, it has to be said, based on the algorithm, which is one of the scary things. We're only really presented with news, no matter which side of the lollipop you suck. We're only really presented with more of the same that we click on. Do you understand? So it's impossible to get a really clear picture of what goes on unless you go actively seeking out as much as you can. And even then it's a befuddlement, isn't it? It's also disturbing to absorb just how much the mainstream media withholds from us, and historically how much they have held from us. Doesn't it boggle the mind to think about how the mainstream media and the press have been able to write history, to shape the narrative? I'm not saying that this has never been a known thing. Many of us have always been aware of this, and our ancestors have always been aware of this, but to have it so baldly painted as we can see it now is rather a shock to the system, because it means that we must question everything we know. We are not privy to so much. Everything we see is curated. All smoke and mirrors, but of course with the advent of social media and cameras all over the place, everyone filming everything they do at all times, we are privy to more information. It doesn't make things any easier. If it was down to the mainstream media, and for example, if there was no X or any social media at all, not that I'm a fan of social media in any way, shape or form, but I do understand where its strengths lie. And if it was down to the mainstream media only, then sure, we'd all know about the far-right thuggery that we've seen and the misinformation coming forward from what they're terming the far right. And that thuggery and violence, by the way, is utterly obscene, inexcusable, and downright wrong. But we see very little in the mainstream media, and in some cases nothing, of the bloodlust of other bad actors. This is what's shocking. Such as the Labour councillor today, Ricky Jones, who was filmed, I think it was today or yesterday, he was filmed delivering an astonishing call to harm, which I won't repeat here, but I'm sure you can tell from the action what is being suggested. This has been a huge story here in the kingdom. He was cheered on and clapped by the supporters surrounding him, all of them claiming to be anti-fascism, anti-this, anti-that, pro-peace. You know, the kindness brigade. Be kind. You just know that they are the type that go around telling everybody to be kind. Clapped at his suggestion, including members of the Amnesty International surrounding him as well. Really? Would we see that sort of footage coming to public attention if it weren't for the fact that it was captured on someone's phone and shared on social media? There certainly was a time when no, we would not have been privy to that sort of information, and that's just a drop in the ocean. Now, one side is not worse than the other side, but it is the two-tier queer world that we inhabit at this moment in time that is the issue we are facing. It is a ball of confusion involving a million nuances, and it requires stepping back and taking a breath, which is what I've been trying to do, taking a breath to negotiate so many conflicting and contrasting points of view and so many individual histories. And one thing I know for sure, by the way, is that mindless violence against citizens and police in particular over the past week is never excusable. Never excusable. Hurling bricks, people, no, abhorrent. The perpetrators are a disgrace. Hurling bricks at people and at officers is the behaviour of pigs and animals. When I said something similar last time, a couple of people picked me up on this. Don't pick on the poor animals. Grow up. The same disparagement goes to those marauding, machete-wielding others. They seem to get far less press coverage and attention, and in fact sometimes none at all, as they maraud about, knives and machetes, attacking various people, screaming their war cries. And my fear, by the way, aside from the violence, my fear, following on from what we've seen over the past week, other than the violence and the civil unrest, involves the impending repercussions that are on their way right this moment, and probably already in practice, from our government and our onlookers and two-tier Kia, who are piling onto the likes of Elon Musk and his X platform. Well, thankfully, in this point in time, we have him as the richest man in the world defending free speech of a kind, but all of our platforms, I would say even his, are at risk at some point. All our platforms, including this one, are going to face the repercussions of more censorship, more cancellation, more regulation, more people silenced. It seems absolutely inevitable, my dears, and I think it's very sad, because the violence that we've seen is going to be used as an excuse to justify draconian measures rather than used as a symptom for the government to scrutinise and get to grips with. Civil unrest is a result of decades of the British public and their wishes going totally ignored. We didn't ask for mass immigration at speed. No, we did not. In fact, we voted against it. Totally ignored have the British public been? Over years. And we've stood by and watched everything that we know and love sink, and it's about to be subsumed by foreign people and foreign cultures. And we've been warned by many people, but I'm talking about the likes of Douglas Murray, the Murrays, the Robinsons. Christopher Hitchens was another one. I'm not a great fan of the Hitchens brothers, well, certainly not of Peter Hitchens. By the way, did you see that recent interview? I don't watch his interviews because I can't actually bear his voice. Many people adore his low tom and that deep voice. And I can't bear it. It makes my teeth itch. And I'm sure some people feel the same about mine. Horses for courses, my dear. But, oh, what a tantrum he threw. Walked out of an interview, that Peter Hitchens, an odious brat he is. Walked out of an interview, very rude. But, you know, his brother was a lot better. Christopher Hitchens. He used to warn about all of this. He's dead now. But he warned everybody about this years ago, that it was all coming round the corner. Nobody listened. What we are being told at the moment is that protests such as the Black Lives Matter movement were not the same, or as destructive or as violent as the riots we've seen over the past week. But I do sense two-tier policing, and I know that I'm not the only one. And a man who is now our Prime Minister took the knee back in 2020, or whenever it was. He took the knee after rioting and vandalism in our own country, where there were also calls to defund the police that he now claims to be protecting. He took the knee, couldn't wait to genuflect and get down and suck on the BLM movement. Well, actually, those protests and also the weekly Palestine, Gaza protests that were held over the past year on a weekly basis for some time, I saw the footage myself, and I saw the calls for jihad. I saw support for Hamas, seemingly by the tens of thousands. I saw war cries. I saw that it was rife with anti-Semitism, rife. And all this was permitted with far more acquiescence than what we've seen over the past week. This is why people are outraged and calling out two-tier policing and two-tier care. Personally, the last thing I want with regards to His Majesty is a message from the King telling us that diversity is our strength, because that's a lie for a start. And I don't want him reminding us that we are a multi-faith, multicultural society. We all know that, and we don't need such patronising messages. What I'm curious to know is what the King and what the Archbishop of Canterbury think is happening to Christendom. What is happening to Christendom? And exactly who is defending the faith? While we stand idly by and watch another faith gain in number, gain in momentum and power and influence on this island. Rowena Davis said, "Dear River, thank you for mentioning the crisis that people in the UK are dealing with at the moment. It's such a difficult time for all of us who value the history and the culture of this great nation, warts and all. My question is this, and it hurts me to ask. With the Southport killings of small children and the anger that this last straw has meant for many people in this country, regardless of who the criminal was, the mass explosions of anger in so many towns and cities, do you think that it is time that the head of state, defender of faith, King of England, Mr. Cozy Socks, should possibly stand the fuck up for us? Sorry, as I wrote this I became angry. It's not menopause and I need one of those fan things. When you call him defender of faith, the King is actually still defender of the faith, not of just faith in general. And as well as being our head of state and our defender of the faith, King Charles is also supreme governor of the Church of England. And yes, Rowena Davies, yes, it is time he stood up for the traditional religion of this land. That is what I would like him to do, more than anything or any other announcement at this moment in time. He doesn't need to be interfering and interjecting all over the shop, but he does need to be making a robust defence of the Church of England and Christendom. And I speak not as a religious person. This is often mistaken here on the channel. I don't claim to be religious, but I am inspired by the ancestral religion of my country, and the religion is inextricably woven into everything. Our language, our laws, our customs, not just here, throughout the entire Anglosphere. If you're watching this in the States, or Australia, or South Africa, Canada, take your pick, and further on throughout the Commonwealth, it's ubiquitous. The Christian religion via the West is woven into everything. Actually, I'm reading a book about it at the moment. I haven't read it, so I'm not recommending it. I know many of you will have read it. I've heard of it, but a friend recommended it to me. Dominion by Tom Holland explains just about that relationship. Whether I'll get round to reading it, I don't know, my dear. I read chapter 1 and then had a break, let's put it that way. But this tells the epic story of how those in the West came to be what they are and why they think the way they do, ranging from Moses to Merkel, from Babylon to Beverly Hills, from the emergence of secularism to the abolition of slavery. It explores why, in a society that has become increasingly doubtful of religion's claims, so many of its instincts remain irredeemably Christian. Christianity's enduring impact is not confined to churches. It can be seen everywhere in the West, in science, in secularism, in gay rights, even in atheism. It is, to coin a phrase, the greatest story ever told. And as I say, it's woven into everything, including monarchy. Does the king really think that the monarchy will be tolerated in his grandson's reign, in the time of King George VII? Does he really think that it is going to be tolerated then if another religion achieves dominance? For example, Islam. I am not asking for a call to arms from the sovereign, but he should be affecting his soft power to bolster and promote our national faith of which he is defender. I do believe that. At the very least, he should be discouraging vast swathes who are adherent to ideologies hostile to our own way of life, discouraging them from seeking and attaining so-called refuge here to begin with. The dinghies that we see crossing the channel are but a microcosm of the macrocosm of this sinking ship that sprang a leak and was breached years ago. God save the King save God.